Innuendo, Book 5 of the Todd Mills Mystery Series. Author, R.D. Zimmerman. Publisher, Scribble Pub Press, Minneapolis, Minnesota. Narrator, Eric Aust. Chapter 23. Sitting in his grandfather's worn red leather chair in the living room of his own apartment, Rawlings took a long drink of beer and tumbled into a black hole of worry. What would he do without Todd? Was he destined to always be alone? Was the stereotype of the lonely old queen prophetic? Oh, God. He didn't know when or if HIV would eventually overtake his life, and that, of course, worried the hell out of him, but he'd always feared the double curse of growing old and being lonely. Just a short while ago, he'd followed Todd all the way to that huge house on Mount Curve. He'd watched Todd, all dressed up in his hippest, get out of his car and go up to the gate and then proceed to the massive front door. At first, Rawlings told himself that Todd was merely going to a party, but then he realized there were scant cars on the street and that apparently no one else was coming. So who lived there? Was it some wealthy homosexual, some spam heir, or plastic surgeon from the Mayo, or one of the queens who'd sold a gajillion of those ceramic Christmas houses? Was some fag with buckets of money trying to steal handsome Todd away from him? A lowly cop whose health was questionable? Rawlings, whose temper could be rageful, had been about to go up there and either shove his way through the gate or climb over the fence. The anxiety had been building like steam in a boiling kettle, and he pictured himself bursting into the huge house. Then, however, the gate on the drive had opened and a white car had come speeding out. It was so dark that Rawlings thought Todd was in the passenger seat, and so, madder than hell, he'd sped after the vehicle. At the very first stop sign on the next block, Rawlings had pulled up alongside the car and stared right in, only to look at a man with a shaved head, who was the only one in the vehicle. As that car then sped away, Rawlings pulled over, shook his head in disgust, then pressed on the gas and somehow managed to get himself to his home. This apartment on the second floor of a duplex. No, I won't cave, thought Rawlings, now sitting there. I won't go to Todd's, not tonight. They hadn't slept apart in months, but Rawlings wasn't going to give. He didn't want to lie next to Todd and wonder where he'd been, what he'd done, whom he'd perhaps kissed, because, of course, he'd go absolutely and completely ballistic. He also couldn't go there because because he didn't want to tell him about Andrew. Yes, the next time Rawlings saw Todd, he'd have no choice. He was going to have to tell Todd exactly what had happened on that afternoon, only hours before that young kid was killed. How could he have been so stupid? Rawlings ran his left hand through his short dark hair and pulled at the roots, clutching the cool beer bottle in his right. He raised it to his mouth and took another swig, and then he got up and went to his old brown leather coat, which hung on the back of one of the old chairs at the dinner table. He reached into the inside pocket and pulled out the small spiral notebook, staring at the small booklet that contained so many confessions, so many fears, so many hopes. Rawlings recalled their last conversation that had taken place early that afternoon. You don't understand, Andrew had said as tears filled those beautiful blue eyes. My entire life is so unbelievably fucked up. You're the only good thing. Don't you understand how much I need you? But Andrew, Rawlings had tried to protest. You can't imagine what happened today. You can't imagine who came by this morning. I just want to kill myself. I just want to throw a belt over the pipe up there and just string my... Stop it! Don't talk like that. You're fine. Everything's going to be okay. But... And then Andrew was falling into Rawlings' arms. No longer the butch farm boy, he was sobbing like a lost child. Yes, that was how it had happened, how it had begun. Rawlings should have just turned and walked out of there. Nope, he should have flown as fast as a bat out of hell. But how could he have left him? He was so upset, so lost. Rawlings remembered looking up, seeing that old pipe, and imagining Andrew hanging himself. Everyone had let that kid down, and Rawlings was determined not to, particularly when he was at his lowest low. But then Andrew had started it, groping Rawlings, rubbing his chest, kissing him, and ripping open his own pants and broadcasting his own eagerness. Recalling that net of seduction that Andrew had thrown over him, Rollins now clutched the diary and returned to the old red leather chair. But wait, thought Rollins. He'd been so focused on those few minutes that had followed, so terrified what the police department and Todd and the world would think, if in fact they ever found out, that he'd all but forgotten what Andrew had said. You can't imagine what happened. You can't imagine who came by this morning. What the hell had Andrew been talking about? Who could that have been? And could it? Rollins now wondered. Somehow, he related to the murder that had taken place a mere few hours later. Absolutely. And could that secret be hidden here in these pages of a lost boy's confession? Quite possibly. His hands all but shaking, Rollins flipped through the diary, stopping at that fateful day. The only true love of my life will be here in a few hours. He means so much to me, so much more than Geordie ever did. And today I'm going to tell Rollins how much I love him, how much I need him, especially after today. Reading those words, Rollins shook his head. Obviously, he'd done something to encourage Andrew. But what? What words? What looks? What false messages of interest had he broadcast? I need him now more than anything because now I understand everything and just how perverted this world really is. I don't know if I can take it. The truths of this world are too weird, too twisted. Rollins remembered the first crush he'd ever had on another man, his high school gym teacher, all but 9 years older than Rollins, who had been 17 at the time. He thought Mr. Stevens was the handsomest, sexiest thing around, his voice so deep, his arms so powerful. He'd fantasized the two of them, going out, having a couple of beers, and then... But of course, Mr. Stevens had been straight. Nothing had even remotely happened, and he had in fact gotten married the next year. This morning I was out in front of the apartment building, just raking like I was supposed to. That's when I noticed that guy. He was sitting in a car and staring at me. He scared me right away because he was kind of creepy. He was bald and wearing sunglasses, and he didn't look very friendly. I just kept raking, but he didn't take his eyes off me. Finally, I heard this car door shut, and I looked up and I saw him coming over. I kind of wanted to run, and I was about to when he called out my name. Andy, you're Andy, aren't you? I didn't say anything. I was sure I never saw him before. I've done it 3 times exactly. 3 times I took money. Once this married guy paid me $50 to let him suck me. Another time this businessman was here for some kind of dentist convention, and he paid me $75 to go back to his hotel room. Then another time this old guy, he was gay for sure, he paid me $25 just to let him watch me jerk off. But what was I supposed to do? I was hungry. I needed the money. But this guy, all I could think was, who's that old troll? And then he said, you gotta be Andy. You look just like your dad. I kind of freaked. I probably should have just taken off instead of just kind of trying to look, tough. And even though I thought my heart was going to pop out of my chest, I said, who the fuck are you? I thought he was a cop or a detective, someone they hired to come find me. He said, a very old friend of your dad. That's who. You little shit. I stared at him, and at first I didn't know what to say. And then finally, how did you find me? It turns out that Geordie Weaver is a bigger idiot than I ever thought. Last night he was all upset about me, probably. And that idiot called home. He probably was bawling to his parents that he wanted to come home or something. What a wuss. And then Mr. Weaver called my house and talked to my dad, and apparently told him where Geordie was living. Dad then asked this guy to come up here and check on me. He went to Geordie's, and then that fucking turd sent him right over here. Thank you very much, Mr. Geordie Fairy Weaver. Yes, thought Rollins. He should have already done it, but first thing tomorrow morning he'd find Geordie and get a formal statement from him. So this guy asks if I'm all right, and I say yes. He said my dad is all worried about me. Well, That was a crock of shit. I knew that right away. My mom, maybe, but not Dad. Not after he beat the crap out of me. So I'm looking at this guy thinking, what is he really here for? And so I say, Dad said he never wanted to see me again, and I don't ever want to see him either. You know what, Andy? Maybe you'll understand someday. Understand what? Things. That's all. Well, if she wants to know, you can tell my mom I'm fine. Now, I gotta get back to work. And then this guy, he goes and pulls $100 bill from his wallet. Like, no way. No way am I gonna go to bed with him. Fuck. What a disgusting fig. I don't want your money, I tell him. Please, your dad is a special friend of mine. We've known each other since we were kids. He just asked me to drive by where you were living. He didn't want me to stop, but then I saw you out here, and I've never seen you before. If you're my dad's friend, then why haven't I ever seen you? You've never been at our farm, have you? And I've never seen you in town, so who the fuck are you? And this bald guy, he looks down at the ground, and then he says, he's going to shoot me for doing this, but there's something you have to know. The way he said it really scared me, and I asked, What's that? Do you promise you won't tell him? I told you. Sure, I answered, even though I knew I was lying. You swear? Yeah, I swear. Now tell me, what is it? And then he tells me. He just blurts it out. It just takes one little sentence, that's all. And then everything's ruined. You're a fucking liar, I yelled at him. I'm sure it's kind of a shock. You're wrong. No, Andy, I'm not. I wouldn't lie about something like that. No. I threw my rake at him and then ran inside. He tried to come after me, but I pulled the front door shut and locked it. He was banging on the door, yelling at me to let him in, but I didn't. I never wanted to see that jerk again. I mean, I couldn't believe it. There had been a mistake. It had to be a lie. I started crying and I ran right to my apartment. I threw myself on my bed. What was I supposed to do? Believe him? Believe him? But, I mean, I had to know. I had to know for sure. So what did I do? I called Dad. I called him on his cell phone. He was out on the tractor tilling the south field, and he picked up right away. Is it true, Dad? I yelled into the receiver. Andy? Andy, is that you? This guy, he just came here and he said something bad about you. I began breaking my promise. Is it true? Do you know him? And is he telling the truth? At first, there was nothing. Like I hit him in the stomach or something. And then he started screaming and yelling at the top of his lungs. Are you crazy? Of course it's not true. And if you ever say anything like that again, God damn it, I'll kill you with my very own hands. Oh my God, it is true, isn't it? You little... And then I hung up. I just sort of dropped the phone. For the first time in my life, everything made sense. I saw how all of us fit together. Mom and Dad, me, my sisters. Now I knew why he hit me so hard in the barn. Why he went so crazy. Everything made sense. Yet nothing did. I still can't believe it. In fact, I can't even write it down. I mean, if anyone ever found this diary and read it, then they know what my dad's been doing. And then Dad really would come after me and kill me for sure. God, I'm so afraid. Afraid? Afraid of what? On the other hand, thought Rawlings, nothing made sense. On the other, everything did. Now he knew why Andrew had been so desperate, why he had been so needy and clingy. Now he understood why Andrew had so wanted to fall into Rawlings' arms. His father had threatened his life, and Andrew had wanted love. He'd wanted comfort. He'd wanted solace. Desperately confused, Andrew had needed all of that. The only mistake he'd made, however, was that he'd tangled it all up with sex, which was so often the case with kids, gay or straight, male or female. for they too often lacked any other way to say, "I need comfort." But then, why should they? Hell, most adults didn't know how to say those three simple words either. It was as horrible as it was pathetic. If only he'd known, Rollins told himself. If only Andrew had come right out and said something. If only he'd told Rollins what his father was involved in, and then maybe he could have helped. So, mused Rollins, holding the diary in his lap and now staring at the blank white wall across the room. Late morning of the day, Andrew was murdered. A bold man had come to see him and dropped a major league bomb. And then Andrew had called his father. And the father had in no uncertain ways threatened his very own son. So, had either one of these men come to Andrew's apartment later in the day, blindfolded him, and cut his throat? Had the bomb man returned, furious that he'd broken his promise, and talked to his father? Or had Andrew's own father come up, knowing that there was but one way to keep silent the truth? Whatever it was. Oh God, thought Rollins, could the world really be that horrible that a father would harm his own son? Gay Mysteries audiobooks. I think it is easy to hate a label, but a face humanizes the word. So this effort is twofold: to offer comfort to those like myself that your world didn't end because you don't fit into the view of acceptable society on both sides, and in hopes of helping those with family that are LGBTQ, that it doesn't mean we are aliens from the child they once knew. Reassure them so they can maybe be supportive at the same time, being true to their values.